All right. Hello, everyone. So excited that you are watching this. I have a great conversation lined up, and I have one of my favorite people with me right now, Kenny. So good to see you. How are you?
Thank you, Megan. I'm doing amazing. Thank you for having me on. It is a pleasure. I think our topic today is actually one of my passions, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you mentioned the topic for today. So let's tell everyone what the topic is. So today we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling, and not just any storytelling, but how storytelling can impact social justice work, how those personal narratives and our lived experiences can really drive change in our environment. So, Kenny, why don't we start with just a little bit about your background? Who are you? How do you kind of resonate with this topic?
Thank you. So a little bit about my background. Straight out of high school, I started going to school for early childhood education. I loved working with kids. I worked in the education system for about 10 years and then really got involved with like advocacy when it came to youth, mentoring, and also allowing them to be creative. So when I started mentoring with high school students, I started putting together like creative talents and art shows and things like that for them to do, as far as like poetry, dance, and being musicians and things like that. Although I'm not a musician or anything like that myself, but it was basically a place where I wanted them to be able to express themselves, and just have them to do something where they stayed out of trouble or they had something to look forward to while they were in school. Um, After that, the education field, I started to look for something a little bit more edgy or challenging as I grew. And I started to venture off into the social work field where I became a crisis counselor, and now currently a violence recovery specialist at the University of Chicago, where I see victims of violence of all ages within the city of Chicago, which is one of the heavily volume trauma hospitals within the country. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I know when we first met, you were working with high school students, and your passion for helping the students express their creativity through different media was what
Hmm.
really drew me to you. Your work with not just art, but like you said, music and storytelling and poetry. And I believe you even did a poetry slam for a while. Like you were just so involved in so many aspects of the creative juices that really impact storytelling because
Yeah.
storytelling isn't just the spoken word.
Mhm.
Storytelling is through all creative outlets. So I know when we first met, you were doing that, and it's been so amazing to see how you have transitioned from that into what you're doing now and the impact of the work you're doing and really discussing and not just glossing over or trying to heal the trauma, but talking
Mhm.
about the trauma and allowing people to have that safe space to do that. And again, talking about the trauma is about the storytelling.
Yeah.
And a big piece of storytelling is the impact of our lived experiences. And I'm wondering, as we talk about this, you said that this is a topic that resonates with you. What is the most powerful story that you've ever heard? And how was that powerful? What impact did that have on you?
That's a great question, by the way. The most powerful story that I've ever heard myself, um, I would have to say recently. I think it just came out maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. Was the story about the exonerated five? Well, I'll say publicly like a documentary about it. Um,
Right.
the exonerated five, where there were about I think it was about 5 or 6 teenagers that were falsely convicted of the rape and assault of a white female in Manhattan, New York. Um, and not just the story impacted and was impactful to me, but it also captured me the way the story was told. I think the story also impacted me because you also got to see personally how the story was told when in the documentary came out on Netflix. I believe it's called When They See Us. There were just like five different series, and it honed in on each teenager, how they were discriminated against, how they were caught, the different perspectives from those that were prejudiced, and those that the perspective of just a kid trying to go out to the park and have fun with his friends. And there's a bunch of calls that there's some muggings and beatings. Unfortunately, a young lady who was just out jogging gets sexually assaulted, and then you have law enforcement that comes and just starts grabbing kids and interrogating them, violating their rights, not having any parents or guardians while they're interrogating these kids, and then they get accused and slap charges on them. I think that really impacted me because you got to see the play by play of each character, of how that story panned out and how each teen perceived that in that moment. Um, and how the dynamics of an adult telling a teenager, this is what you need to say, this is what you need to do. And then it pans out, later on down the road of how they had to fight for their freedom while they were behind bars. And then later on, when they grew up, after they were exonerated, after spending like 10 to 11 years in jail, they started their own non-for-profits. They started advocating for people of color. They started advocating for those that were falsely accused or convicted of a crime that they did not do. One of them, I believe the name was Salam Yusuf, became a lawyer and a legal advocate. So it was really that transformative aspect that really showed me personally as like, I may not have been through that story personally. I may have not been convicted or locked up personally, but there are challenges and things that I've been through in my life, in my childhood, that was not for a void or a non-purpose. Things that caused me to be passionate about today, that there are other people that are suffering from these injustices, that I have a voice now, or I have a influence or a platform now that I can speak out against, or for, to get them help. One of the things that really captured me in that story is also the connectivity of that. Even though they've went through all of the things that they went through, there's still hope and resiliency in mankind. Um, they went through so much, and just years and years, over a decade in jail. A lot of people who have suffered through that may not have made it. Um, had many mental health issues and things like that. So it really gives us a window to say, like, whatever the challenges that I may face, the discrimination, the injustices, or anything that I may face today that may be a social or economical obstacle, because these guys overcame their situations and they told their story, they publicized it. That shows me, because these are true stories, that my story is for a reason as well. So that really showed me a lot, and it really impacted me a lot. I'm sorry if I feel like I was rambling, but
No, it was great. And you brought up so many good points. I mean, one thing that really stuck out from what you shared is this is a story that people did not hear about until it went into
yeah.
the public mass media, right? And there's so many examples like that on a daily basis, especially when we look at marginalized communities and the
Hmm.
history of marginalized communities. How until it
Yeah.
becomes a Netflix special or a box office hit, people of privilege don't even
That's
recognize
true.
that those experiences happened, right? It's not my
Yeah.
lived experience, so it must not be real. But bringing it into the public eye and saying, hey,
Hmm.
this is something that's worth telling, this is a story that needs to be told, it allows people of privilege who don't have those lived experiences, or people from similar identities that don't
Hmm.
have the lived experience of that, to be able to learn from someone else's lived experiences. And I think that is number
Hmm.
one, the power of storytelling, as long as we're willing to
Hmm.
listen to the story
Yes.
being told, right? And second, it's about bringing it to the mass media. It's about bringing it to the
Right.
larger masses of people because these stories are happening every day. And we saw that with
Hmm.
example with the murder of George Floyd. We saw people saying, "Oh my gosh, police
Yeah.
brutality is horrible." Yeah, it's been horrible. It's
Yeah.
been like that for centuries. Like the police force was started
Hmm.
to keep slaves enslaved. I mean, if we want to talk about the history and the reality of things, we have to act like nothing that's
Yeah.
happening today
It's
is
just now
brand
getting out
new.
there.
But that's the power. Exactly. But that's the power of storytelling. We have to be willing to share our stories and we have to be willing to open up the doors of mass media and society to let those stories come in to places that we have not heard those
Hmm.
stories because it's not in our textbooks. It's not in our upbringing. It's not in our general society's culture to talk about some of these things that
Yeah.
can be uncomfortable from time to time.
So, Megan, I do have a question for you. What role does personal narratives play in shaping our perceptions of social justice issues?
Yeah. I mean, so one thing I think about, and I know when we were kind of talking about how we wanted to structure today's conversation, one thing I was thinking about with that question was
Hmm.
how stories can inform and misinform, right?
Yeah.
And we were
Hmm.
just talking about how the impact of personal stories and the impact of lived experiences in mass media when it's
Yeah.
publicized. But I think sometimes those stories can misinform. So, like, we
Yeah.
talk a lot in Us Squared about confirmation bias and stereotype bias, right?
Yeah.
So, what we saw many years ago, and even to today in some extent, we see stories that perpetuate the stereotypes that people have about certain groups.
Hmm.
So, what I mean by that is we might hear a lived experience about a person of African descent
Hmm.
who lives in the projects and went to jail, and it just perpetuates the stereotype
Yeah.
that so many people have, right? Or there's a picture of, or a movie about a person who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community who is living with AIDS, right? So it
Yeah.
perpetuates the stereotypes. And
Hmm.
my thing with that is it doesn't take away the lived experience, right? That
Hmm.
is someone's lived experience. However, there are other people who don't fit those same identities that have
Yeah.
similar lived experiences. And it's important for us to see a balanced perspective that
Hmm.
doesn't misinform or perpetuate the biases that we see in society. And I
Yeah.
think that is one piece, at least for myself, that I think about when I see
Hmm.
things. I'm constantly watching TV, reading books about social justice. My entire life is social justice. And
Yeah.
I find myself going, well, that's stereotypical, isn't it? And
Hmm.
it's frustrating sometimes, right? And I don't
Hmm.
know if you experience that or if you have similar thoughts or like I remember it's gotten better now and I probably shouldn't admit this, but I don't watch as much news right now just because it's depressing and it's difficult. But I remember when the news was a part of my daily routine. And I
Yeah.
remember hearing a story before they would show the picture of who it was. I would have my fingers crossed, like, please don't be this kind of identity. Like, please don't be a black person. Please don't be this. Please don't be this. Like, there were so many pieces in my brain, like, please don't confirm the bias that society already thinks.
Yeah.
Have you
Yes.
ever had that feeling or?
Absolutely. I definitely have, especially when it's something that's like high profile. And as you were saying that, I was like, even when storytelling, when it comes to social justice as well, the news, the media, those journalism outlets, they dictate how they're going to tell your story, especially if you are someone that has been detained, if you have been incarcerated. They don't give you the chance to tell the background, the why you did, or why you may have not
That
did,
right
and they,
there, the why.
yes. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's like they get the juicy parts, the crime, the charge, and then they form their own perspective and narrative. They get your picture, and then they put it up on the 5 o'clock, the 12 o'clock news, and then
Right.
the masses, the watchers get to make up whatever that bias or prejudice that came through that news story or article. Um, and many times work, even someone like myself, yes, we sit in front of the news screen, and we say, I hope they're not that identity. I hope they're not this. I hope they're not that. But even from someone that may fit into the identity as an African American person, some of us can sit back and say that person probably did that because they didn't have structure. They have disparities in their communities. They stole something from the grocery store because they may lack money for food at the moment. So
And
now
they
they're
were
being,
hungry.
yes, and they're being classified as a criminal when in actuality they just didn't have a basic need. Um, yes, so it's a lot of times it's really like some of us we experience this, but it's a good part that I'm trying to put myself get myself news outlets that are um, people of color, that have news outlets and medias that are aware of these biases that come through some of these major media outlets. I'm wondering, do you watch the news at all anymore? Or?
You know, I watch news that comes across my stream. So I have certain like
Okay.
alerts on. There's
Uh
certain
huh.
keywords I look for and I'll watch the clip from that. But I don't sit down and watch like the 4 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news, or I don't even know what time it comes on anymore. But now
Hmm.
my father, if I go to their house, he
Hmm.
has the news on 24/7. He is consistently watching the news. And
Got it.
he calls himself my research assistant, right? If something comes up, he'll save it, and when
Uh
I
huh.
go over to visit, we'll watch it.
Hmm.
But you bring up so many points of, I mean, there's so many things that you were saying. I was like, that right there. And so many things I'm like, yes, that's part of the issue. Like, why do we have to watch a specific news channel to get a certain perspective? Why
Yeah.
can't we have a journalistic viewpoint that says, here's one perspective, here's another perspective. What's your perspective? Right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's just so difficult. And then even when people are given the opportunity to share their own experience, like the why behind it,
Hmm.
there are people on the other side who say, well, now they're just making excuses.
Yes.
And as a society, we need to get to the point where we're saying this is not someone saying it as an excuse. This
Hmm.
is someone saying this so that we can fix the problem, so that we don't see more people go down this path in the future. We might
Yes.
not be able to fix the current person that's sharing that experience because they have already lived through it. But
Hmm.
what we can do is learn from our current lived experiences so that our future generations don't have to experience the same things.
Absolutely. Yes. I
Right?
agree
I
with
mean,
that.
that's my whole goal with my son. My son is
Hmm.
a black man in America, and my goal is to leave a legacy that he doesn't have to experience some of the things that people before him have had to experience.